Have you ever wondered why some people walk away from a relationship and yet months later they suddenly start thinking about you again? Why someone who once seemed so certain about leaving begins to feel curious, restless, and even drawn back toward the very person they left behind? It feels confusing. It feels unfair. One moment they say goodbye as if the chapter is finished forever, and the next moment their presence slowly starts returning into your life again. Messages appear. Small signals show up, sometimes even a quiet attempt to reconnect. But here is the deeper question most people never ask themselves. What actually causes that shift inside the human mind? If you stay with me until the end of this video, you will understand a powerful psychological truth about human behavior that very few people talk about. It is not manipulation. It is not games. It is something much deeper. It is the way the human brain reacts to loss, value, and emotional space. And once you understand this principle, you will start seeing breakups and attraction from a completely different perspective, because the truth is simple yet uncomfortable. Most people react to breakups in the exact way that destroys their power. Think about what usually happens the moment a relationship ends. Emotions explode. The heart feels shocked. The mind starts racing with questions. What went wrong? What could I have done differently? Why did they suddenly change? In that emotional storm, many people do the first thing that feels natural. They chase answers. They send messages. They try to explain themselves. They try to fix things that are already broken. They believe that if they just say the right words, show enough love, or prove their feelings strongly enough, the other person will suddenly realize their mistake and come back. But human psychology does not work that way. In fact, the opposite often happens. When someone decides to leave a relationship, their mind has already built a story, a quiet internal story that justifies their decision. Maybe they tell themselves that the connection was fading. Maybe they believe they needed space. Maybe they convince themselves that life would feel easier without the relationship. Whatever the reason, their brain has already created a sense of emotional certainty. Now imagine what happens when the person they left begins chasing them. Every long message, every emotional conversation, every attempt to convince them to stay. Instead of increasing attraction, it actually reinforces the story they already believe. It confirms their power in the situation. It tells their brain that they still control your emotional state. And when someone feels that level of control, something strange happens inside the human mind. Curiosity disappears, mystery disappears, and once mystery disappears, emotional tension fades as well. But here is where the psychology becomes interesting. Because the human brain does not only react to presence, it reacts even more strongly to absence. When someone expects your attention and suddenly it is no longer there, their mind begins to notice the silence. At first it feels small, just a quiet difference in routine. They may check their phone expecting a message that never arrives. They may expect you to reach out the way you always did before. And when that pattern breaks, the brain begins searching for an explanation. Why are they not calling? Why are they not asking questions? Why do they seem calm? At first, the questions are subtle, but the human mind does not like unanswered questions. Our brains are designed to complete patterns. When something changes unexpectedly, curiosity begins to grow. And curiosity is one of the strongest psychological triggers that exists. This is the moment when emotional dynamics begin to shift. Because while you might think silence means losing someone, in many cases silence actually creates psychological space. And inside that space, something powerful begins to grow. Awareness. Your absence forces the other person to experience life without the emotional safety net they once had with you. The small daily messages disappear. The attention they once received fades. The emotional reassurance they used to feel slowly becomes distant. And the brain starts comparing the present moment with the past. Human memory has a fascinating pattern. When something is gone, the mind often highlights the positive moments more than the painful ones. Memories become softer. Laughter becomes clearer. Shared experiences suddenly feel more meaningful than they did before. And this is where many people begin making a mistake. They believe attraction is built through constant effort, constant communication, constant proving of love. But psychology shows something different. Value increases when something is not guaranteed. When something is always available, the brain becomes comfortable with it. Familiarity turns into routine. Routine turns into emotional blindness. People stop noticing what they once appreciated. But when that presence disappears, awareness returns. The brain begins to ask a new question. Did I lose something valuable? And that question is powerful, because the moment someone begins questioning their decision, their emotional certainty starts to weaken. What once felt like a confident choice now becomes a quiet doubt in the back of their mind. This does not happen overnight. Human emotions rarely move that fast, but the seed of curiosity has already been planted. And curiosity has a strange way of growing over time. The more someone wonders about you, the more their mind begins filling the silence with imagination. They begin wondering what you are doing, how your life is changing, whether you move forward faster than they expected. And suddenly, the emotional direction begins to change. The person who once walked away with confidence slowly starts thinking about the person they left behind. Not because of pressure, not because of chasing, but because silence made them notice something they had stopped seeing before. And the deeper truth you will discover as this video continues is that this shift does not begin with trying to bring someone back. It begins with understanding your own emotional power. Understanding this emotional power changes everything, because the moment you stop reacting from fear of loss, a different kind of strength begins to appear. This strength is quiet. It is not loud. It is not dramatic, but it is deeply felt by the human mind. And the one action that creates this shift is something most people avoid after a breakup. They avoid it because it feels uncomfortable at first. They believe distance means giving up. They believe silence means losing the connection forever. But psychology shows something very different. The action is emotional detachment. Not anger, not cold revenge, not pretending that the relationship never mattered. Emotional detachment simply means reclaiming control of your inner world. It means refusing to let another person's decision dictate your peace, your focus, or your direction in life. It means you stop chasing explanations that will never satisfy the heart. You stop trying to convince someone of your value. And most importantly, you stop reacting in the way they expected. When a relationship ends, the person who leaves usually predicts your reaction. Human behavior follows patterns, and our minds are very good at anticipating those patterns. They expect sadness. They expect long conversations. They expect attempts to reconnect. They expect emotional pressure that tries to pull them back into the relationship. And when that expectation is fulfilled, their mind feels confirmed in the decision they made. But when that reaction never comes, something unusual happens inside their thinking process. The script they expected suddenly disappears. They prepared themselves for emotional responses, yet instead they encounter calm distance. They expected repeated attempts to fix things, yet they experience quiet acceptance. This creates psychological uncertainty, and uncertainty has a powerful effect on human curiosity. The brain becomes alert when something unpredictable happens. It begins searching for meaning. It begins asking questions that did not exist before. Did they move on already? Why do they seem so composed? Was the relationship not as important as I thought? These questions may seem small, but they slowly open a door inside the mind. Because uncertainty challenges the story they told themselves when they chose to walk away. The mind wants emotional clarity. When that clarity disappears, attention returns to the person who is no longer reacting. And this is where many people misunderstand the idea of detachment. It is not a strategy designed to make someone return. It is a personal transformation that shifts how you see yourself. Instead of measuring your value through another person's approval, you begin rebuilding your identity from within. You focus on growth. You reconnect with goals that existed before the relationship. You invest energy into your physical health, your mindset, and the direction of your future. Slowly, your emotional center becomes stable again, and something remarkable begins to happen. When you stop trying to prove your worth, your behavior starts reflecting confidence. You speak less about the past. You carry yourself differently. You become more present in your own life instead of mentally living in memories. This quiet change is noticeable even without direct contact. People sense emotional energy more than they realize. When someone once had emotional influence over you, they are used to seeing certain reactions. They remember how strongly you cared. They remember how quickly you responded to their presence. When those familiar patterns disappear, their perception begins shifting. The person they thought they understood now seems different, and difference creates attention. Human beings are naturally drawn toward individuals who appear secure in themselves. Confidence without desperation creates an invisible attraction. It communicates strength without saying a single word. And strength is something people respect instinctively, but emotional detachment does something even deeper than creating respect. It restores balance. During a breakup, emotional control often becomes uneven. One person feels hurt while the other feels certain. One person searches for answers while the other moves forward. But when you regain control of your emotional state, the dynamic changes. The imbalance disappears. Now the other person can no longer predict your behavior. They cannot measure your feelings the way they once did. And because the human mind seeks familiarity, it begins revisiting memories to understand the new reality. This is where curiosity quietly transforms into attention. They begin thinking about the connection again. They wonder about the person who is no longer trying to hold them back. They notice the absence of emotional pressure. Instead of feeling pushed, they feel space. And space creates reflection. Reflection leads the mind back through shared experiences. Conversations once taken for granted become clearer in memory. Moments of laughter, understanding, and emotional support begin resurfacing. The brain naturally revisits meaningful experiences when something familiar becomes distant. This does not mean the relationship instantly returns. Human emotions are more complex than that. But a subtle shift has already begun. The certainty that once supported their decision slowly becomes mixed with curiosity. And curiosity has a powerful habit. The more the mind thinks about something, the more emotionally significant it becomes. What started as a quiet question gradually becomes a stronger awareness of what once existed between two people. And when awareness grows, the emotional weight of the past begins to feel different. Because distance does not always erase connection. Sometimes it reveals the value that routine once hid. Value becomes visible when something is no longer constantly in front of us. This is one of the quiet truths about human nature. When a person is always present, the mind slowly adapts to that presence. It becomes normal. It becomes routine. The brain stops paying deep attention because it assumes the connection will always be there. This is how emotional familiarity forms inside relationships. At first, everything feels exciting and alive. Every message matters. Every conversation carries energy, but as time passes, the mind becomes comfortable. Comfort is not bad, but it often hides appreciation. Now imagine what happens when that constant presence suddenly disappears. The daily interaction fades away. The emotional support that once existed is no longer easily available. The rhythm that two people shared quietly dissolves. And in that moment, the brain begins noticing something it had stopped seeing before. The absence becomes real. The mind begins to feel the difference between life with that connection and life without it. Psychology calls this contrast. Contrast is powerful because the human mind understands value through comparison. When something is present all the time, there is nothing to compare it with. But when it disappears, the brain begins placing the past beside the present moment. And this comparison creates awareness. Small memories begin returning. A certain laugh, a specific conversation. A moment of understanding during a difficult day. These memories rise slowly, not all at once. The brain replays them naturally because it is searching for emotional meaning. And when people remember experiences that once brought comfort, the mind often highlights the positive parts more strongly than the negative ones. This is how nostalgia forms. Nostalgia is not just remembering the past. It is the emotional warmth connected to those memories. It softens harsh details. It focuses on the feelings that once made life brighter. And when the mind experiences this warmth, curiosity about the past connection grows stronger. The person who once seemed easy to walk away from suddenly becomes more meaningful in memory. Another important psychological pattern also begins to appear during this time. Human beings often desire what feels rare. When access to someone becomes limited, the mind starts recognizing that person differently. Scarcity changes perception. What once felt ordinary can begin to look valuable simply because it is no longer guaranteed. This principle appears everywhere in human behavior. People protect things that feel limited. They pay attention to opportunities that may disappear. They invest emotional energy in what feels difficult to obtain. The brain reacts strongly to anything that is not easily available. The same reaction happens in relationships. When your attention is no longer constant, it stops feeling predictable. Your presence becomes something that cannot be assumed. This shift forces the other person to experience emotional distance they may not have expected. At first, they might ignore it. They might focus on their own life and believe the past is behind them. But the mind keeps noticing patterns. When a familiar source of attention disappears, the brain registers the change even if the person does not immediately admit it. Over time, the silence becomes noticeable. Moments that once involved conversation now feel different. Situations where they once shared thoughts with you now feel incomplete. And slowly, the emotional gap becomes visible. The brain starts exploring questions again. What is that person doing now? Have they changed? Are they happier without me? These questions are not always spoken aloud. Often they remain quiet thoughts that appear unexpectedly, but the more frequently these thoughts appear, the more emotional weight they gain. Curiosity transforms into reflection. Reflection leads to deeper thinking about the connection that once existed. During this process, the mind may begin revisiting the reasons for the breakup. At first, those reasons felt clear. The decision seemed logical, but distance has a way of changing perspective. Situations that once looked overwhelming can begin to feel smaller when time passes. Emotional intensity fades. With less pressure, the brain starts analyzing the relationship from a new angle. Sometimes people begin realizing that certain problems were temporary. Sometimes they recognize that the connection itself had value they overlooked in the moment. These realizations do not happen instantly, but they slowly influence the way the past is understood. This shift does not mean someone immediately returns. Human emotions move in layers. First comes curiosity, then reflection. After reflection comes awareness. Awareness is the stage where a person begins recognizing the impact someone had on their life. And impact creates emotional gravity. The mind naturally moves toward experiences that once carried meaning. It replays conversations that felt genuine. It remembers support during moments of stress. It recalls laughter during ordinary days. These memories remind the brain that the connection was not empty. When the mind begins seeing that value again, a new feeling can appear. Interest. Interest is different from curiosity. Curiosity asks questions. Interest moves closer to action. It brings attention back to the person who once felt distant. It encourages the mind to observe again, to notice again, to think again about what once existed. All of this begins from something very simple: space. Space allows emotions to breathe. It allows memories to return naturally instead of being forced through pressure. It allows the mind to rediscover meaning without feeling pushed toward a decision. And when someone rediscovers value on their own, that realization carries far more power than any argument or explanation ever could.